And welcome back. It's time for our Capital Report with Pat McGuigan of CapitolBeatOK.com. Pat, we found out Oklahoma could be looking at an increase in revenue of $500 million for next fiscal year. This would be due to a surge of income tax receipts to pre-recession levels. So talk about, well, what do you attribute this boost to, and is this something that's going to last?
It's going to last at least for the foreseeable future, barring some national or maybe even international circumstances that we've covered before, banks in Europe, or problems at the national level. Absent that, this probably will last. And let me give you some details real quickly. Over 11 months, this is not even counting June, up through the end of May in the fiscal year, government revenue for the state of Oklahoma is increased 10%. $347 million more than the estimate, but $450 million more year over year, just with 11 months, remember, and that's where you get the figure 500 million plus. Oklahoma's headed to a good year in terms of government income growth due to all categories except gross production taxes, which are the taxes on oil and gas. Other than that, all areas of government revenue have increased impressively. And here's an interesting thing. Last year, they were able to refill some of the rainy day fund, $249.2 million. They're now estimating that after this year's deposit into the rainy day fund, and this is money not necessarily subject to spending, but there as a reserve, will be back up to $600 million, which was around the level before the Great Recession. So that's why it's significant. Growth again in all areas except gross production tax, and that's giving some caution to the enthusiasm.
Let's change topics. You've been following, and a lot of us have been following. There are a couple of groups this session that seem to be on the opposite end of the spectrum on just about every issue. A couple of think tanks, Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs and Oklahoma Policy Institute. Talk about their influence on policy and politics in Oklahoma.
Well, ideas are important, and these are ideas factories, if you will. They have very intelligent folks working for them. OCPA's a bit bigger, conservative think tank in a conservative state. But let me start with Oklahoma Policy Institute, which David Blatt runs. In recent days on my website, CapitolBeatOK.com, I've posted an analysis looking back at this session, basically fiscal issues from both Oklahoma Policy Institute and OCPA. Bottom line, Oklahoma Policy Institute points out that the appropriated dollars for the coming year are still less than they were in the last pre-recession year, which would have been fiscal year 2009. So they really press on that, basically making the argument that we need even more in order to finance state government adequately. They note that because of the absence of federal stimulus funds not being in the spending pool this year, that the state budget is actually flat, despite the fact that the legislature appropriated more money. And finally, David Blatt makes a strong point of pointing out that the percentage of funding going to common education is actually lower than it was in 1992. Percentage. Now, the reason I add that is, of course, then what OCPA would point out accurately is, yeah, but government is much bigger than it was in 1992. Now, let's turn quickly to OCPA. Real quick, in a joking way, they refer to Marlin, McGuigan, and McAffrey making very different analyses. Marlin Oil, Ralph Harvey, myself, and Al McAffrey, a liberal Democrat from inner city, Oklahoma City, making very different points, but saying almost the same kinds of things. The original Marlin point was that if the Republicans weren't careful, they'd make the case for an alternative, i.e. the Tea Party or Libertarians. My point was that last year, Oklahoma government basically engaged in tinkering, not right-sizing. And Al's point was that we were looking at the possibility of an unraveling of conservative principles on fiscal issues. Now, bottom line, what OCPA's allegation is, and it's true, is that there were increases in spending and no tax cuts. And when you look at the difference between Sam Brownback, the governor of Kansas and what happened here in Oklahoma, Mary Fallon and the other and the Republicans in the legislature, it's kind of disappointing. So ideas, all arguing over the same set of facts and information, and you can see that when you read their stuff, but reaching very different conclusions. That's all the time we have, I think.
Yes, but you can read more about these and other topics at CapitolBeatOK.com. For Pat McGuigan, I'm Alex Cameron. Have a great Saturday.